A rancher bought 3 young Apache women to free them, but ended up marrying all 3. The sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty hills of the southwest, casting long, golden shadows across the rugged landscape. The air was crisp, and the wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and dry earth. A rancher named Samuel had already been awake for hours, tending to his animals and checking the fences that bordered his land. Life on the ranch was not easy. It required early mornings, hard labor, and careful attention to every detail. But Samuel had learned to find peace in the quiet of the land, the rhythm of work, and the small rewards that came with a well-kept ranch. Samuel was a man known in his town for his strong sense of justice. He had lived through many years of conflict between settlers and local Apache communities, and he had seen the suffering that came from misunderstanding and cruelty. He had heard countless stories of families torn apart, young people taken from their homes, and innocent people treated as though they were nothing more than property. These stories never left him. They haunted him in his dreams, and they pushed him to act when he could. One day, while Samuel was traveling to a nearby town to trade cattle and supplies, he came across a scene that made his heart ache. 3 young Apache women were being held by a group of men who seemed more interested in profit than in anything else. The women looked frightened and exhausted. Their eyes carried a mixture of fear and quiet strength. Samuel could not turn away. He knew that he could not simply pass by and pretend he had not seen what was happening. Something deep inside him compelled him to intervene. He approached the men carefully, his voice firm but calm. He explained that he was willing to buy the women's freedom. At first, the men were suspicious and refused. They had grown used to people like Samuel either ignoring such situations or taking advantage of them. But Samuel persisted. He offered fair payment, enough to satisfy their greed without exploiting the women further. After tense negotiations, the men finally agreed. The women were free, not because they had any choice in the matter, but because Samuel had refused to let their lives continue under the control of those who wished them harm. The moment the agreement was made, the women's expressions shifted. They were cautious, still unsure of whether they could trust this stranger who had paid for their freedom. Samuel understood their hesitation. He did not expect immediate gratitude or acceptance. Instead, he offered them what they needed most: safety, food, and a place where they could rest and regain their strength. He guided them carefully to his wagon, making sure they were comfortable during the long ride back to his ranch. Along the way, he spoke softly, introducing himself and explaining that they were no longer in danger. He did not demand answers, only that they begin to feel that the world could hold kindness and safety once again. Arriving at the ranch, Samuel showed them their new home. It was modest but sturdy and warm. The ranch was surrounded by fences to keep the animals safe, and a small garden grew near the house, full of vegetables and herbs. The women were hesitant at first, peering around at the unfamiliar surroundings. Everything was different from what they had known. The wooden walls, the smell of cooked food, the quiet hum of animals in the distance. Yet, there was a calmness here that they had not felt in a long time. Samuel gave them space to explore, to rest, and to adjust. He never forced them to do anything before they were ready. Days turned into weeks, and the women slowly began to settle into their new life. Samuel made sure they had work to do, not as a burden but as a way to feel useful and involved. They helped care for the animals, learned to cook with the ingredients available on the ranch, and began to tend to the small garden. At first, the work was exhausting. Their bodies were not used to this kind of labor, and the sun often left them tired and aching. But Samuel worked alongside them, showing patience and encouragement. He taught them new skills with care, never raising his voice or making them feel lesser because of their lack of experience. During these early days, communication was sometimes difficult. The women spoke little English, and Samuel knew only a few words of their language. But even without words, a bond began to form. Samuel learned to understand their gestures, their expressions, and the small ways they showed gratitude or discomfort. In return, the women began to trust him more, noticing his consistency, his fairness, and the fact that he never asked for more than he gave. Trust grew slowly, like the sprouts in the garden they tended together. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Samuel sat with the women outside the house. They shared a simple meal of corn, beans, and roasted meat. There was laughter, small at first but genuine, as they began to tell stories of their pasts, their families, and their dreams. Samuel listened, not as a judge but as someone who wanted to understand. He shared stories of his own life, of the hardships of ranching, and the moments of joy that made it all worthwhile. Though the language barrier still existed, the exchange of stories became a bridge, connecting them through shared human experience. As days continued, the women began to see Samuel not just as a protector, but as someone who genuinely cared for them. They noticed how he treated the animals with respect, how he never raised his voice unnecessarily, and how he always sought to do what was right, even when it was difficult. Slowly, a sense of security took root. They began to smile more freely, to laugh without fear, and to help one another adapt to this new chapter of their lives. Samuel, too, felt a change within himself. He had acted out of compassion, but as he watched the women grow stronger, more confident, and more comfortable in their surroundings, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It was not just about freeing them from danger. It was about helping them reclaim a part of life that had been stolen from them: freedom, dignity, and the chance to choose their own paths. This realization filled him with both humility and a quiet pride. He had not only provided safety, but had also become part of a story much larger than his own, a story of resilience, trust, and the human capacity for care. As the first part of their journey came to a close, the women had begun to see the ranch not as a prison or obligation, but as a place where they could heal and grow. Samuel had proven himself to be more than a rescuer. He was a guide, a teacher, and, in time, someone they could begin to rely upon with their hearts. And although the future was still uncertain, the foundations of trust and understanding had been laid, promising that whatever came next, they would face it together, not as strangers, but as people whose lives had been irrevocably and meaningfully intertwined. Life on the ranch was not easy for anyone, and for the three young Apache women, it was a world entirely different from the one they had known. Their days were long, filled with chores that required both patience and strength. They tended to the animals, feeding the cattle, collecting eggs from the chickens, and helping with the horses. At first, every task felt overwhelming. Their hands ached from the work, their backs were sore from bending and lifting, and the relentless sun left them tired by midday. Yet, they also noticed the steady rhythm of ranch life, a rhythm that was unlike the constant uncertainty they had experienced before. Here, life moved predictably, and even though it demanded effort, it also promised safety and stability. Samuel watched them carefully, understanding that their adjustment would not be simple. He knew that learning the ways of the ranch, the rhythms of domestic life, and the expectations of this new world would take time. He never rushed them, never scolded them for mistakes, and never assumed they would immediately understand everything. Instead, he led by example, showing them the proper way to handle a calf, how to mend a fence, or how to start a fire without wasting wood. His patience was endless, and he encouraged them with gentle words and quiet smiles, making them feel that even when they struggled, they were capable and valued. The women began to notice small changes in themselves as the days passed. They were becoming stronger, more confident, and more skilled. The first time one of them successfully rode a horse across the ranch without falling, her face lit up with pride. When another managed to harvest vegetables from the garden without guidance, she felt a sense of independence that was new and exciting. And when the third learned to milk a cow for the first time, she was amazed at what her hands could do. These small victories gave them hope. They began to realize that this life, though different from what they had known, had possibilities they had never imagined. Yet, adjusting to this new life was not just about work. It was also about understanding the man who had freed them. Samuel was patient but observant. He noticed when they were tired and allowed them to rest. He noticed when they were hesitant and never forced them to act against their comfort. And he noticed when they began to trust him, showing glimpses of warmth in their expressions, small smiles, or the way they lingered near him while working. Slowly, the walls of fear they had built around themselves began to crumble. They realized that Samuel's care was genuine, that he did not see them as property or as objects of pity, but as human beings deserving respect, kindness, and dignity. Communication remained a challenge, but it became less daunting over time. The women knew only limited English, and Samuel knew very little of their language, but gestures, expressions, and shared experiences began to form a bridge. They laughed together when a horse refused to cooperate or when a basket of eggs tipped over. They celebrated silently when the garden yielded a good harvest. Samuel even began to learn a few words in their language, and the women taught him some simple phrases. This exchange, small as it was, became a symbol of trust and cooperation. It showed that even without perfect words, human connection could flourish through understanding, patience, and shared effort. As the women adjusted, a sense of curiosity began to emerge. They wanted to know more about the land, the animals, and the routines of ranch life. Samuel welcomed this curiosity, explaining the cycles of planting and harvesting, the behaviors of different animals, and the importance of maintaining the land. He taught them about the weather, how to read the skies, and how to prepare for storms. They listened eagerly, asking questions when they could and watching closely as he demonstrated each task. Slowly, the ranch no longer felt like an unfamiliar world. It was becoming a place where they could belong, a place where they could learn, grow, and contribute. Evenings on the ranch brought moments of reflection and quiet connection. After a long day of work, the women would gather near the small fireplace in the house, where the warmth and light created a sense of comfort and security. Samuel often joined them, sitting quietly as they shared their thoughts, told stories of their past, or asked questions about the world around them. Sometimes they laughed together, sometimes they sat in thoughtful silence, but every evening strengthened the bond between them. The trust that had begun to form during the day deepened in these moments of shared peace and understanding. Though the women were beginning to feel more comfortable, there were still moments of fear and uncertainty. Memories of their past lives, of danger and mistreatment, would surface unexpectedly. Samuel noticed these moments and never dismissed them. He would sit with them quietly, offering a reassuring presence rather than words, letting them know that they were safe. Over time, these moments became less frequent, and the women began to experience a sense of stability they had never known before. They began to imagine a future in which they could plan, dream, and make choices for themselves. As the months passed, the women also began to observe qualities in Samuel that went beyond his kindness. They noticed his dedication to his work, his respect for the land, and the way he treated the animals with patience and care. They saw how he interacted with neighbors and travelers, always fair and honest, never seeking to take advantage of anyone. These observations deepened their respect for him. They realized that he was a man of integrity, someone who lived by principles rather than convenience. This respect laid the foundation for the deeper connection that would develop between them in the days to come. The women also began to learn from each other. Each had her own strengths, knowledge, and perspective. They shared stories of their families, of traditions, and of the skills they had learned before arriving at the ranch. They helped each other with tasks, laughed together, and offered comfort when one of them felt tired or overwhelmed. This camaraderie created a sense of sisterhood, a small but powerful support system within their new life. It reminded them that they were not alone, that together they could face challenges and celebrate victories. Samuel observed this growing bond between the women with quiet satisfaction. He had hoped that freeing them would provide safety and opportunity, but he had not anticipated the deep relationships that would form among them. He realized that the ranch was not just a place of work, but a place of learning, growth, and connection. Every shared task, every story, every small moment of laughter or comfort was shaping a new chapter in all of their lives. They were no longer simply the rescued. They were becoming integral members of a household, partners in daily life, and participants in a shared journey toward a better future. By the time spring arrived, the ranch had transformed from a place of uncertainty into a home filled with energy, life, and hope. The women had grown stronger, more capable, and more confident. Samuel had become a figure of stability, guidance, and quiet support. And the ranch itself seemed to reflect this change. The garden flourished, the animals thrived, and the house was filled with the warmth of trust, respect, and growing friendship. What had begun as a rescue had blossomed into a shared life of learning, adaptation, and discovery. Each day brought new challenges, but also new moments of joy, connection, and understanding. In these months, the women began to see possibilities that had seemed impossible before. They realized that freedom was not simply the absence of danger, but the ability to live with choice, dignity, and hope. Samuel had provided safety, but he had also offered something far deeper: the chance to rebuild their lives on their own terms, with guidance and support but without control. This realization brought a quiet sense of gratitude and a growing sense of affection for the man who had given them this opportunity. And while the future remained uncertain, the foundation of trust and mutual respect was strong enough to face whatever lay ahead. As part 2 of their journey came to a close, the women had transformed from frightened captives into confident individuals beginning to embrace their new life. Samuel had not only provided freedom, but had also nurtured growth, trust, and resilience. The bond between them deepened each day, laying the groundwork for the next phase of their story, one that would explore emotional connections, personal growth, and the beginnings of a profound and unexpected companionship. The ranch, once simply a place of survival, had become a home, a school, and a space of possibility for all of them. And in this shared space, the seeds of the extraordinary life to come were quietly taking root. The months passed, and life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. The women had grown accustomed to the work, to the routines, and to the safety that Samuel had provided. Yet, something deeper was beginning to stir. What had started as cautious trust was slowly transforming into something more meaningful, an emotional connection that neither Samuel nor the women had expected. It was subtle at first, a shared smile over a task well done, a comforting touch when one of them stumbled, or a word of encouragement at the right moment. These small gestures began to build a foundation of understanding, respect, and eventually affection. Samuel himself was not blind to this change. He noticed the way the women's eyes brightened when he entered the room, the way they worked a little harder when he was near, and the way their laughter lingered in the air long after the day's work was done. He had always cared for them deeply, but now he began to see their personalities in a new light, their courage, their intelligence, their sense of humor, and the unique ways each of them faced challenges. Each woman had her own strengths, and he admired them all equally. It was a realization that brought a mixture of joy, awe, and a quiet nervousness. Samuel had never anticipated that the relationships formed out of rescue and necessity would grow into something so profoundly personal. The women, too, were feeling emotions that were unfamiliar but undeniable. They had been through hardships that tested their trust, their courage, and their resilience. Yet in this new life, they discovered that they could feel safe enough to allow themselves to care for someone else. Samuel's consistency, his kindness, and his unwavering fairness had earned their trust, but now it earned their hearts as well. They found themselves thinking of him in quiet moments, noticing small details, how he handled the animals, how he treated the land, how he never forced them to act against their comfort, and how he always considered their needs before his own. These observations slowly grew into admiration, and admiration blossomed into affection. One day, while tending to the garden, one of the women paused to watch Samuel repair a fence along the property line. He worked carefully, measuring each post, hammering each nail with precision, and wiping the sweat from his brow when the sun grew hot. She felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride and fondness. He was a man who worked tirelessly, not just for his own benefit, but for the well-being of those around him. She realized that this was not just a rescuer or a caretaker. He was someone remarkable, someone worthy of respect and love. She shared a quiet glance with the other two women, and they, too, had noticed the same qualities. Without words, they all understood that Samuel had become much more than a figure of protection. He had become a part of their hearts. Evenings brought the opportunity for deeper connection. After the long days of work, they would sit around the small fireplace in the main house, sharing stories, memories, and laughter. They spoke of their pasts, their families, and the hardships they had endured, and Samuel listened with empathy, never interrupting, never judging. In return, he shared stories of his own life, his family, and the challenges of managing a ranch in such a harsh landscape. These evenings became a sacred time, a moment when the barriers between rescuer and rescued began to fade. Trust gave way to intimacy, and intimacy began to form the threads of love. The women also began to teach Samuel about their own culture and traditions. They told him about the customs of their families, the stories passed down through generations, and the skills and knowledge that had been part of their lives before they came to the ranch. Samuel listened with fascination and respect. He learned new ways to observe the land, to notice the weather, and to approach tasks with patience and mindfulness. This exchange of knowledge created a bond that went beyond survival. It was a meeting of worlds, a blending of experiences that enriched all of their lives. The women began to feel that Samuel not only valued them as individuals, but also honored the history and culture they carried with them. As the seasons changed, the emotional bonds grew stronger. They found comfort in small routines, preparing meals together, mending clothes, caring for the animals, and tending the land. These shared responsibilities became a source of connection, a way to understand and appreciate one another. Samuel began to recognize the unique qualities of each woman, the quiet determination of one, the gentle wisdom of another, and the fiery courage of the third. He admired them individually, but he also admired how they supported one another, forming a sisterhood that made the household stronger and happier. Their lives had become intertwined, each one contributing to the strength and warmth of the ranch in her own way. Challenges still arose, of course. Misunderstandings happened when words failed, fatigue led to irritability, and old fears sometimes resurfaced in the women's minds. But Samuel's patience never wavered. He would listen, explain, and offer comfort. He never imposed his will, never demanded obedience, and never allowed frustration to turn into anger. Instead, he taught by example, showing the value of kindness, understanding, and empathy. Slowly, the women learned that not every hardship required struggle alone, and that true partnership meant facing difficulties together. This lesson was as valuable as any skill learned on the ranch. Over time, the women began to express their affection in small ways. A touch on the arm when Samuel offered assistance, A warm smile during shared tasks, or laughter at a private joke became their language of care. Samuel responded in kind, offering reassurance, gentle guidance, and moments of shared joy. These expressions of emotion were subtle, respectful, and filled with genuine feeling. They did not rush the process. Instead, they allowed love to grow naturally, nurtured by trust, respect, and shared experience. One particularly memorable afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in from the mountains. The sky darkened, winds whipped across the ranch, and the animals grew restless. Samuel and the women worked together, securing fences, bringing animals to shelter, and ensuring the garden would survive the heavy rain. In the midst of the storm, they relied on one another completely, each person's strength supporting the others. By the time the sun returned and the clouds cleared, a deep sense of accomplishment and unity had settled over them. That day became a turning point, a vivid reminder that their bonds were not only emotional but also practical, rooted in shared responsibility, care, and trust. As the months turned into years, the relationships continued to deepen. The women were no longer just the rescued. They were partners in life, participants in the work of the ranch, and companions in daily joys and challenges. Samuel's feelings grew as well, evolving from compassion to admiration, then to love. He saw in each woman qualities that complemented the others, creating a household full of balance, understanding, and harmony. He respected their individuality while appreciating the collective strength they brought to the ranch. The community around the ranch began to notice the change as well. Neighbors and travelers observed the warmth, respect, and cooperation among Samuel and the three women. Though some were curious or skeptical of such an unusual household, the consistent kindness and hard work displayed by all of them spoke louder than words. Samuel did not seek approval or recognition. His focus was on building a life filled with dignity, trust, and love. The women, too, found pride in their roles, realizing that their contributions were valued and respected. Through shared experiences, mutual learning, and quiet moments of connection, the bonds between Samuel and the women reached a point where trust had blossomed into affection, and affection was beginning to hint at love. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and hardship together, and in doing so, they had discovered the extraordinary strength of human connection. What had begun as a simple act of rescue had grown into something far more profound. A household built not only on safety and survival, but on understanding, respect, and the beginnings of love that would shape the rest of their lives. By the end of this chapter in their story, Samuel and the three women were no longer simply individuals coexisting under the same roof. They had become a unit, bound together by shared labor, shared knowledge, and shared emotion. The foundation of their relationship was strong enough to support the next stage of their journey, one in which the bonds of affection would deepen further, and the complexities of their connection would begin to unfold. In the quiet moments of the evening, by the fire or under the stars, they began to glimpse the possibility of a future filled with not only safety and stability, but also companionship, understanding, and love. As time passed on the ranch, the bond between Samuel and the three women continued to grow stronger, deeper, and more meaningful. What had begun as trust and quiet admiration had now evolved into affection, and the question of the future naturally began to arise. Samuel had spent years caring for the land, the animals, and the people who had come to rely on him. But he had also learned that life was about more than survival. It was about connection, love, and shared purpose. The women, too, had discovered that their strength, resilience, and independence could coexist with the warmth of companionship. Together, they faced the challenge of imagining a life where their hearts, as well as their hands, were fully involved. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, Samuel paused to consider the path that had led them here. He thought about the first time he had seen the women in danger, the way he had insisted on buying their freedom, and the slow, careful process by which trust had been built. He realized that he now cared for them in a way that went beyond responsibility or gratitude. He admired each of them for their courage, their kindness, and their unique personalities. He understood that life had brought them together not by chance, but in a way that required careful thought and heartfelt decisions. He approached the topic gently, knowing that any suggestion about marriage or deeper commitment must be made with care and respect. One evening, as the sky was painted with hues of pink and orange, Samuel gathered the three women and spoke from the heart. He explained that he did not wish to impose anything upon them, that their freedom and choice were the most important things in his mind. He shared his feelings honestly, expressing admiration, affection, and a desire for partnership, not ownership. His words were measured, patient, and full of respect. He wanted them to understand that love was a choice, not an obligation, and that their consent and comfort were paramount. The women listened carefully. Each had her own thoughts, feelings, and hesitations. They had grown to trust Samuel deeply, but they had also learned to value their own voices, their autonomy, and their ability to make decisions for themselves. They reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the hardships they had endured, the new skills they had learned, and the emotional growth they had experienced. They realized that Samuel had not only given them freedom, but had also nurtured their confidence, independence, and dignity. This realization made them consider the possibility of partnership with him, not as a duty, but as a choice based on mutual respect and affection. In private, each woman contemplated her feelings. The first woman thought about Samuel's patience and the way he had encouraged her to grow. She remembered how he had treated her with respect from the very beginning, never speaking down to her or assuming she could not make decisions. She felt gratitude, admiration, and a quiet affection that had grown over time. The second woman reflected on the shared moments of laughter, work, and learning. She realized that she had come to rely on his presence not just for safety, but for emotional support and companionship. The third woman considered his integrity, the fairness he showed to everyone, and the way he balanced responsibility with kindness. She felt a connection that went beyond words, rooted in shared experiences, trust, and mutual understanding. Together, the women recognized that their feelings aligned with Samuel's. They valued him, respected him, and could imagine a life built together. When they spoke to Samuel, their response was thoughtful, respectful, and consensual. Each woman expressed that she was willing to share her life with him, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection and a desire for partnership. They wanted to be equals in this relationship, contributing to the household, the ranch, and the shared life they were building. Samuel felt a profound sense of relief, joy, and gratitude. The decision had been made freely by all, and that freedom of choice made their union all the more meaningful. They were not bound by circumstances alone. They were choosing one another, consciously and wholeheartedly. Life after this decision brought new responsibilities, challenges, and joys. Together, they worked to create a home that reflected the values they shared: respect, cooperation, and kindness. Each woman took on roles that suited her strengths, whether in the garden, the kitchen, caring for animals, or managing daily chores. Samuel continued to work alongside them, not as a master, but as a partner, demonstrating that leadership could be shared, and that care and guidance were forms of support rather than control. The ranch became a place of harmony, where each individual's contributions were valued and celebrated. The community around them began to notice the change. Neighbors and travelers who visited the ranch observed a household that was unconventional by local standards, yet remarkable in its warmth and unity. Samuel and the women worked together seamlessly, supporting one another in ways that inspired respect and curiosity. Though some whispered about their unusual arrangement, most recognized the strength, love, and mutual respect that defined their household. It became clear that what mattered was not tradition or expectation, but the happiness and well-being of those involved. Their life was guided by principles, not by judgment, and that gave them confidence in the choices they had made. Daily life continued to be a mix of work, learning, and shared experiences. The women taught Samuel skills from their own culture, and he shared knowledge of the land, animals, and ranching techniques. Together, they celebrated the harvest, prepared meals, and cared for each other in sickness and in health. They developed routines that balanced productivity with moments of leisure, allowing time for conversation, laughter, and quiet reflection. Each day reinforced the bonds between them, showing that life together required effort, patience, and understanding, but also offered rewards far beyond the challenges. The emotional connection deepened with time. Simple acts, a gentle touch on the shoulder, a smile shared across the garden, or an encouraging word at just the right moment, became symbols of affection, trust, and love. Samuel and the women learned to communicate not only with words, but through gestures, expressions, and shared experiences. These small, consistent actions strengthened their bond, proving that love could grow quietly, steadily, and powerfully, without grand gestures or declarations. It was built in the ordinary moments of daily life, in the shared work, the laughter, and the mutual care they offered one another. There were moments of challenge, of course. Adjusting to a shared life with multiple partners required communication, compromise, and understanding. Feelings of jealousy or insecurity sometimes arose, but Samuel and the women addressed these emotions openly and with respect. They learned to listen, empathize, and find solutions together. These experiences reinforced their connection, teaching them that love was not just a feeling but a practice, a daily choice to support, respect, and care for one another. Through these lessons, their household became stronger, more resilient, and more united. Over time, the women became more confident in their roles and in their relationships. They learned that partnership did not diminish their independence, but rather enhanced it. They had voices, choices, and the freedom to express themselves. Samuel valued their opinions, included them in decisions about the ranch, and celebrated their accomplishments. Together, they built a life that honored individuality while fostering collaboration and shared purpose. The ranch was not only a place of work, but a home where trust, respect, and love created a safe and nurturing environment for all. The future, once uncertain and filled with fear, now appeared full of possibility. The women had transformed from frightened captives into empowered individuals who had chosen to share their lives with Samuel. They were partners, friends, and companions, each bringing unique strengths and perspectives to their shared life. Samuel, in turn, had found a family, a household built not only on care and responsibility, but on love, mutual respect, and shared dreams. Together, they had created something extraordinary, a life that defied expectations, celebrated individuality, and embraced the power of choice and connection. By the end of this chapter in their journey, Samuel and the women had established a foundation for a shared life that was strong, stable, and filled with affection. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and hardship together, and emerged with bonds that were deeper than trust alone. Their household had become a place of growth, learning, and love, a space where each person's voice mattered, each contribution was valued, and each individual was free to flourish. And as they looked toward the future, they did so with confidence, knowing that the choices they had made together would guide them through the challenges and joys that lay ahead. Years passed on the ranch, and life had taken on a rhythm that was both comforting and fulfilling. Samuel and the three women had built a home together, one that thrived on trust, respect, and mutual care. The ranch had grown, crops flourished, the animals were healthy, and the house was filled with warmth, laughter, and the hum of everyday life. What had begun as a simple act of rescue had evolved into a profound partnership, one that changed the lives of all involved. Each person contributed their strengths, skills, and perspectives, and together they had created something far greater than the sum of their parts. Samuel often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He remembered the day he first saw the three women, frightened and uncertain, held captive by men who cared little for their lives. He remembered the nervous moments of negotiating their freedom and the long, careful process of earning their trust. And now he looked around the ranch and saw not just rescued women, but partners, friends, and companions who had shared years of work, laughter, and quiet reflection. The transformation was extraordinary, and it filled him with gratitude and pride, not pride in himself, but pride in what they had accomplished together as a household. The women, too, often reflected on their journey. They remembered the fear and uncertainty that had defined their early days, the loneliness of being in a world that was unfamiliar and sometimes hostile, and the slow, careful steps toward freedom and trust. They remembered the patience, kindness, and unwavering fairness Samuel had shown, and how those qualities had allowed them to grow, learn, and regain confidence in themselves. Now they were able to look back with a sense of accomplishment, recognizing how far they had come, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. They had transformed from captives into independent, capable women who had chosen to share their lives with someone they respected and loved. Together, they faced challenges as they had always done, by relying on one another. Storms still threatened the ranch, animals still needed care, and the land still demanded attention, but these obstacles no longer felt insurmountable. They had learned to work as a team, combining their skills, strength, and insight to solve problems and ensure the well-being of their home. Each challenge became an opportunity to grow closer, to learn from one another, and to demonstrate the depth of their commitment. In facing hardship together, they strengthened the bonds of trust and affection that had carried them this far. One of the most remarkable aspects of their shared life was the way they celebrated small victories. A good harvest, a new calf born healthy and strong, or the completion of a long-term project on the ranch were occasions for shared joy. These moments were often marked by laughter, storytelling, and quiet gratitude. They reminded each other that life was not only about labor and responsibility, but also about enjoyment, connection, and appreciation for the little things. Through these celebrations, the household strengthened its sense of community, resilience, and happiness. The women also nurtured one another's growth in unique ways. They shared knowledge, skills, and insights that enriched the household and deepened their bond. One taught Samuel a new method of planting that she had learned from her family. Another shared a story or custom that connected them to their heritage and strengthened their sense of identity. The third encouraged the others to approach tasks with courage and creativity, inspiring confidence and determination. These exchanges were more than practical. They were acts of love, trust, and mutual respect, showing that growth and support could flourish in a shared household built on equality and understanding. Samuel, in turn, continued to provide guidance, support, and encouragement. He helped each woman pursue her strengths while allowing her independence and choice. He never imposed, never demanded, and never took for granted the trust they had given him. His leadership was gentle but steady, rooted in empathy and a desire to nurture rather than control. In doing so, he fostered a home where every individual felt valued, heard, and empowered. The household had become not only a place of survival, but a space of flourishing, where love, respect, and collaboration shaped daily life. Over time, the women began to teach Samuel lessons he had never anticipated. They showed him perspectives from their own culture, insights into the land that he had not noticed, and ways of approaching life with patience, creativity, and mindfulness. Samuel learned to listen more deeply, to observe more closely, and to value perspectives beyond his own experience. This exchange enriched their lives immeasurably, strengthening the household and deepening the emotional bonds that tied them together. It also reinforced the principle that a strong home was built on reciprocity, respect, and shared learning. As the years went on, the relationships between Samuel and the women deepened into a profound, enduring love. It was not the fiery, dramatic passion of novels or stories, but a steady, enduring love built on trust, respect, shared experience, and mutual support. They knew each other's strengths, weaknesses, and fears. They knew when to offer comfort, when to give space, and when to celebrate together. Their love was quiet, patient, and resilient, capable of withstanding hardships and growing stronger through shared joys and challenges. It was a love rooted in understanding, choice, and the daily practice of care. The legacy they created extended beyond the boundaries of the ranch. Travelers who passed through often remarked on the harmony, respect, and cooperation they witnessed. Neighbors learned that Samuel and the women lived not according to convention, but according to principles of fairness, compassion, and shared responsibility. Their story became a quiet inspiration, a testament to what could be accomplished when people treated one another with dignity, respect, and kindness. Samuel and the women did not seek recognition, but their example quietly spread, showing the power of trust, cooperation, and love in everyday life. Children eventually came into their household, bringing new joy and responsibility. Samuel and the women approached parenting with the same care, respect, and patience they had applied to every aspect of their shared life. The children learned not only the skills necessary to survive and thrive on the ranch, but also the values of respect, cooperation, empathy, and love. The household became a true family in every sense, with shared responsibility, mutual support, and the guiding principle that each person's voice and well-being mattered. Through this, the women's legacy extended into the next generation, showing that compassion and partnership could create a lasting impact. As the years wore on, the ranch itself became a symbol of their journey. What had once been a simple property with fences and fields had transformed into a thriving, vibrant home. The garden flourished with vegetables and herbs, the animals were healthy and content, and the house was filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet hum of life. Each corner of the ranch carried stories of effort, resilience, and love, proof of the extraordinary life they had built together. It was a testament to the fact that what begins as a simple act of kindness and courage can grow into something truly remarkable when nurtured with patience, respect, and love. The women often reflected on their journey with gratitude and humility. They had been through fear, uncertainty, and hardship, yet they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. They had discovered that freedom was not merely the absence of danger, but the ability to choose, to grow, and to love. Samuel had given them safety, but he had also given them the opportunity to reclaim their voices, their independence, and their ability to shape their own lives. And in doing so, he had become not just a companion, but a partner, a friend, and a member of a family they had chosen with care and thoughtfulness. Samuel, too, reflected often on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all together. He realized that what he had intended as an act of rescue had become the foundation of a life full of love, learning, and partnership. He marveled at the courage, strength, and wisdom of the women, and he recognized that they had changed him as much as he had changed them. Their lives were intertwined in ways that were deep, meaningful, and enduring, creating a shared story that would be remembered not just for its uniqueness, but for the values it represented: trust, respect, compassion, and the enduring power of love. In the quiet moments of the evening, when the work was done and the sun dipped below the horizon, they would sit together outside the house, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The wind would whisper through the trees, carrying the scents of earth, herbs, and distant mountains. In these moments, they would reflect on their journey, the challenges they had faced, the fears they had overcome, and the love they had nurtured. They would speak softly of their dreams for the future, of the children they hoped to raise, and of the life they continued to build together. These moments of reflection were filled with peace, gratitude, and the quiet joy of knowing that they had created something lasting and beautiful. By the end of their journey, Samuel and the three women had transformed not only their own lives, but the lives of those around them. Their household stood as a testament to the extraordinary potential of kindness, patience, and love. What began with a simple act of freeing three young women had grown into a life filled with trust, respect, and shared purpose. The ranch had become more than land, fences, and animals. It had become a home, a family, and a living example of the power of human connection. The legacy of Samuel and the three women would endure, carried forward not only in the daily work of the ranch, but in the hearts and minds of everyone whose lives they touched. And so, the story of the rancher and the three women came to a close, not as an ending, but as the continuation of a life built on trust, courage, and love. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and challenge together, and in doing so, they had created a life of beauty, dignity, and meaning. Their story remained a quiet inspiration, a reminder that compassion, respect, and shared effort could transform lives, heal wounds, and build something lasting and extraordinary. In the warmth of their home, under the vast southwestern sky, Samuel and the women had found not only safety and stability, but the deepest, truest form of happiness, a life shared with those they loved and those who loved them in return.